Sometimes a project really doesn't go the way you had intended, and you end up with some of these weird details that you didn't anticipate at the beginning, such as this little window that wasn't really our plan. We didn't realize this opening existed. It was actually where the stovepipe came out on the original cabin. You can tell that because it's charred around here from when the stove got a little bit too hot, and this wasn't the kind of installation you'd do today. But now it's just going to be a little window. Now this little building is not one we built from scratch. I think I've talked about that before, but just to review a little bit, these logs came from an old homestead cabin that was on a ranch maybe 5 or 10 miles from here as the crow flies, just over the other side of the hill here. And at some point, the people that owned that property wanted this one and another one gone. The other one, as I understand it, they dug a big hole and just pushed it in with a front end loader and buried the thing so they didn't have to worry about it anymore. Somebody else took pity on this building and disassembled it one log at a time. Now Dave did a great job taking it down, meticulously numbering every log. There's wall A, wall B, wall C, wall D, and log 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on for each wall. So all of those numbers were on the logs at that point, so you could put this back together exactly the way it had been. So all of the logs line up, all the door and window openings are the way they are. Unfortunately, he had the logs for 5, 6 years, something like that, stored them, never did anything with it. Then we bought the logs from him, thinking we were going to do something with them on another piece of property we had back then. We've since sold that, moved the logs up here. They sat up here for another 5 years or so. So it had been well over 10 years since these were disassembled and those paper labels were put on the logs. By the time we got to putting this up, there were maybe 3 or 4 labels that you could still read the numbers on. Most of them were long gone, and we had no idea how all this was supposed to go up. So we did the best we could, and some of our guesses were a little bit off. For instance, this window should have been the door, and we should have had the whole building oriented 180 degrees based on where we wanted the door. But we didn't realize that when we started. We were just starting with long logs and then put the logs that were split that we thought were the doorway on the other side of the building. And as we went up, we realized we didn't have enough logs to make everything match. We had used full-length logs where we should have been using cut logs, and we had cut logs then for where we should have been using full-length logs. And that's why this spot that is now the front door should have been a window, and those full-length logs should have been swapped around, but we ended up not having the right half logs to go in next to the door because they're now over there in the window. So we end up with this sort of cutoff thing here, and originally we were thinking we would just cut these two off to match, and we put a little side light next to the door, kind of a way to get a little bit more light in here, maybe see if somebody was coming up to the door. Not that we ever expect anybody to come up here that we weren't expecting anyways, but that really doesn't suit the character of this building. So now, before I do the door and window bucks in here, I think I'm going to splice in these logs. I've seen a lot of old buildings that have been restored that had rotten sections cut out, and that's about all they can do is just splice in a section of good log. I think there's enough of the logs left from the original building that we can work with that. We didn't actually go up as high. We're a little over 8 feet, and that's high enough, but there was a few more rows of logs in the original. But the original sill logs were rotted out, and some of the other logs had some rot, and there's not much good wood left out there. Even though there's a couple of rows worth of logs, they're just rotten and falling apart. But I think I can find enough good material to replace these 3 little ends here. And there will certainly be some other quirky little details like these odd warped logs that have shifted over the years, so it's humped up in one area and touches the bottom log in another area. There's going to be places on the gable ends where I'm going to have to put trim. I think I talked about that in the last video. And it's going to have to run off at an angle in relationship to the log because the log isn't level. But that way if I put that trim or flashing in level, it'll make it easier to sheet the gables in the long run. And I think that's going to make for a better solution. But it's going to make the building look just a little bit more quirky and a little bit more funky. There's a few places where the chinking gaps are so wide that I'm going to have to put a little filler log in, but it doesn't need to go full length, so it's just going to be this little plug partway in the wall. And we can either cover that over with chinking, or we can just let it show for what it is, and I think that's probably what we're going to end up doing. I'm okay with a little funky, a little quirky, a little irregular, things that aren't textbook perfect. I think it adds a lot of character to the place, and I've never been one for sterile perfection. I don't want this to look like it came out of a sawmill with all milled logs that fit perfect, like Lincoln logs used to. I want this building to have some character. So all these little details are just going to be part of the fun of the building as far as I'm concerned. In a little space like this, it seems like cleaning up after yourself is a constant problem. Things get cluttered really fast. It seems like you cut one board and suddenly you can't find room to work anymore. So this morning I'm cleaning up after my last project up here, which was working on these rafter ties. I think I called them collar ties in the previous video. These are more technically called rafter ties, and originally we're going to use them as ceiling joists. And ceiling joists are just there to mount the ceiling to. We thought we were going to have a flat ceiling in here, but after looking at it, we decided it would look a little bit more open and would be more interesting if we just had the rafter ties every 4 feet, which is the minimum code requires on those. Then we'll put some sort of tongue and groove boards on the rafters to be the actual ceiling. Working up here on the cabin where we don't have any electricity, it's the main reason I was really excited when Jackery offered to work with me several months ago and send out this battery bank. They're not sponsoring this video, but this is the reason that I really wanted to have one of these things. It can sit up here, it runs all the power tools I need up here. The solar panel, even though they sent me the smallest solar panel they have, is enough to keep this thing charged up. So thanks Jackery for sending this out. Like I say, they're not sponsoring this video. I just thought it was worth mentioning because that's really making my life easier up here. Jen and I really like to look more It's open, it's more airy, it's sort of a decorative element to have a little king post in there, which is not strictly required. We just thought it would look better to do it that way. And now that those others are all cut out, I don't think there's any way I can fit them back in. There just simply isn't enough room for a long board. Those had to go in before the roof was decked. So there's no going back now. I admit this next video to be about doing door and window bucks, but we're waiting for confirmation on rough opening sizes on the windows to make sure I get those just right. That's not something I want to do again, but we're getting close and we will get to that. In the meantime, I've got more cleaning to do. We'll see you for the next video.